The lights of the sold-out arena burned like twin suns, casting long shadows over the octagon. Thousands of voices roared in anticipation, their energy crackling through the air like an impending storm. Fans from all corners of the world had waited for this moment, debating endlessly about who would emerge victorious. Some swore by Daniel Cormier's legacy, his dominance in two weight classes, his wrestling that could break the will of giants, and the heart of a champion that had seen him conquer some of the greatest fighters in history. Others believed in the storm that was Khamzat Chimaev, a relentless force, a wrecking ball that had bulldozed through his competition without a shred of hesitation. Tonight, one of them would have to break. Cormier sat in his corner, rolling his shoulders, his mind as sharp as ever despite the years that had passed since his last fight. Retirement had never truly silenced his competitive spirit. He had built a career defying doubters, overcoming setbacks, and proving time and again that skill, grit, and intelligence could outmatch brute force. His heavyweight power was still there, his wrestling pedigree unmatched, and his experience a weapon forged in the fires of countless battles. But even he knew this fight was different. He wasn't just facing another skilled opponent, he was facing a man who fought like he had something to prove to the world every time he stepped into the cage. A man who had never known fear inside these walls. Khamzat stood across from him, bouncing on his toes, his expression unreadable. To him, fighting wasn't just a sport, it was survival. He had grown up in hardship, sharpened his skills in the depths of struggle, and built a reputation as a warrior who never backed down. His opponents didn't just lose, they were demolished. The way he closed distance, the way he drowned his rivals with overwhelming pressure, it was almost unnatural. His rise had been meteoric, his hunger unmatched. And now, standing in front of him was a legend he intended to take down. The tension between them was almost unbearable, the weight of expectation pressing down on the cage like an invisible force. Fans screamed for blood, for glory, for history to be written in sweat and bruises. The commentators could barely contain themselves, throwing rapid-fire breakdowns of how this fight could unfold. Would Cormier's Olympic-level wrestling be enough to neutralize the beast in front of him? Could Khamzat's relentless pressure and fearless striking overwhelm a man who had faced the very best? There were no easy answers, only possibilities, ones that would soon become reality. The referee stepped forward, eyes shifting between the two warriors. His words were drowned out by the chaos of the crowd, but it didn't matter. Both men knew what was coming. Cormier exhaled slowly, his hands loose but ready. Khamzat's lips curled into the faintest of smirks, his fingers flexing like a predator about to pounce. This wasn't just a fight, it was a clash of generations, of styles, of legacies. And when the bell rang, the world would finally know who would walk out victorious. Then the horn sounded. The instant the horn sounded, Khamzat exploded forward like a bullet fired from a gun. There was no hesitation, no feeling out process, only raw aggression. Cormier had expected pressure, but not like this. Khamzat closed the gap in a blink, launching a looping right hand aimed straight for the veteran's chin. Cormier barely managed to get his hands up, absorbing the force against his forearm before instinctively ducking under and shooting for a clinch. The crowd erupted as the two locked up, muscle against muscle, experience against hunger. Cormier tightened his grip, his body reacting before his mind could fully process the speed at which Khamzat had attacked. He felt the younger fighter's strength immediately. His frame was wiry but unrelenting, each movement laced with the kind of power that could only come from years of grinding through the toughest sparring rooms. Khamzat tried to muscle Cormier backward, but the veteran dug his feet into the canvas, shifting his weight at the last second and reversing the position. For a moment, the pace slowed, the intensity focused into the smallest of movements as they fought for control. Then, without warning, Khamzat yanked himself free with a violent shrug, creating just enough space to launch a knee toward Cormier's body. It landed flush. The impact sent a shockwave through Cormier's core, forcing a sharp exhale through clenched teeth. The crowd gasped, sensing a shift in momentum. But instead of retreating, Cormier did the unexpected. He grinned. It wasn't the smile of a man in pain, but of one who had just figured something out. Khamzat saw it too late. In his eagerness to press the attack, he had left himself open for just a fraction of a second. Cormier capitalized instantly, dropping levels and wrapping both arms around Khamzat's waist. Before the younger fighter could react, the world flipped upside down. The arena roared as Cormier executed a textbook takedown, planting Khamzat on his back with bone-jarring force. For the first time in his career, Khamzat found himself pinned beneath someone who wasn't just strong, but impossibly heavy. Cormier's top control was legendary, a suffocating presence that had broken even the toughest of fighters. He adjusted his weight expertly, locking Khamzat in place, preventing him from scrambling free. The younger man bucked and thrashed, but Cormier absorbed it all with practiced ease. He had wrestled men far bigger than Khamzat, endured wars against opponents with greater striking power. He knew how to drag a fight into the deep waters. But just as Cormier was about to settle into a dominant position, something unexpected happened. Khamzat stopped struggling. The wild, frantic movements ceased, replaced by a stillness that was almost unsettling. Cormier recognized the shift too late. In a flash, Khamzat twisted his hips and exploded upward, using the very moment Cormier adjusted his base to create an opening. His legs coiled like springs, launching him into a reversal that sent shockwaves through the crowd. In a matter of seconds, the tables had turned. Cormier was no longer the hunter. A stunned murmur rippled through the audience as Khamzat gained top position, his relentless energy returning in full force. He postured up, fists cocked, ready to rain down strikes. But just as the first punch was about to land, something strange flickered in his eyes. For the briefest moment, there was hesitation. A fraction of uncertainty. And that hesitation was all Cormier needed. Without warning, he shifted his hips and exploded upward, shoving Khamzat back just enough to create a window of escape. The two scrambled to their feet, the crowd on the edge of their seats as they reset, breathing heavily but far from finished. They had both tasted the best of what the other had to offer, and neither was willing to break. And then, something neither of them expected happened. A voice from outside the cage cut through the noise, loud enough for both fighters to hear. It wasn't a coach, nor a fan. It was someone whose presence shouldn't have been there at all. The moment the voice rang out, both fighters instinctively turned their heads, their battle-hardened focus momentarily shaken. It was deep, commanding, and unmistakably familiar. The crowd roaring just moments ago hushed into a stunned silence as people strained to see who had spoken. Standing just beyond the cage, gripping the chain-link fence with white-knuckled intensity, was none other than Khabib Nurmagomedov. His expression was unreadable, but his presence alone sent a ripple of tension through the air. For Khamzat, it was as if time had slowed. Khabib wasn't just another spectator. He was a legend, a symbol of discipline and dominance, someone who had walked away from the sport without ever tasting defeat. His presence wasn't random. He had chosen this moment to step forward. But why? That split second of distraction was all Cormier needed. With the instincts of a seasoned warrior, he lunged, wrapping his arms around Khamzat's waist in a powerful body lock. Khamzat snapped back to reality, but it was too late. Cormier had already hoisted him off his feet. The entire arena erupted as Khamzat was lifted high into the air before crashing back down with a thunderous slam. The impact echoed through the octagon, the kind of takedown that sapped the will out of even the toughest fighters. But Khamzat wasn't just tough, he was relentless. Despite the force of the slam, he immediately twisted his body, trying to scramble free. But Cormier was an anvil pressing down on him, smothering every movement. The veteran shifted his weight, trapping Khamzat's arm while locking in a deep half-guard position. Every time Khamzat tried to explode, Cormier countered, nullifying his attacks with effortless efficiency. The younger fighter was caught in unfamiliar waters. He was used to being the hammer, but tonight he was the nail. For what felt like an eternity, Cormier controlled him, making every second under his weight feel heavier than the last. Sweat dripped onto the canvas as the clock ticked down, and the reality of the situation began to sink in for Khamzat. He had never been dominated like this before. His gas tank, which had seemed bottomless, was running on fumes. His confidence, once unshakable, was cracking under the sheer pressure of Cormier's experience. But just when it seemed like the fight was reaching its inevitable conclusion, Khamzat did something no one expected. He stopped struggling. His breathing slowed, his body relaxed, and for the first time in the fight, he accepted the moment. And then, with a sudden, calculated movement, he shifted his hips and managed to slip his leg free just enough to create an opening. The crowd, still processing what they were witnessing, watched in disbelief as Khamzat reversed the position in one last desperate surge. Cormier gritted his teeth, realizing too late that Khamzat had set a trap. With a burst of energy that seemed to come from nowhere, Khamzat surged forward, forcing the fight back to standing. The two warriors separated, both battered, both breathing heavily, but neither backing down. The final seconds ticked away, the echoes of their struggle etched into the walls of the arena. And then the horn sounded. The fight was over. No knockout, no submission, just two warriors who had given everything they had. The judges would decide the outcome, but in that moment, it didn't matter. Both men had earned each other's respect in a way that words could never capture. Khamzat, still catching his breath, glanced toward Khabib. The former champion gave him the slightest nod, as if acknowledging something only they could understand. Cormier, ever the sportsman, extended his hand, and after a moment of hesitation, Khamzat took it. The decision was announced, but by then, the result had become secondary to what had unfolded inside the cage. This was more than just a fight. It was a test of heart, of will, of what it truly meant to stand across from another human being and leave everything inside those walls. And as the fighters stood in the center of the octagon, under the blinding lights, they knew that no matter what the record book said, both had left as something greater than when they had entered.